Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Simon Gelson recording Simon Says for MTGOacademy.com and of course showcasing another Theros draft. We do have to draft triple Theros because Born of the Gods isn't out yet and it's going to take even longer to appear on Magic Online, sadly. But it's turning out to be quite an exciting set, using some of the old mechanics of Theros, of course. Born of the Gods features heroic creatures, for example, features scrying, features bestow creatures. So all of this is something that we already know. But the real question is, how do we prepare for a changing but not completely new limited format? And of course, I know what you're all excited for is spoilers. You look at all the new cards that are getting spoiled, and it's easy to look at a card and say that this is too expensive for constructed, or this is really low impact, it doesn't generate card advantage. But for limited, it's also important to look at some of the overarching themes of each set and how they interconnect, how they work with each other. And today I just want to do a little bit of that, look at the first preview cards of Born of the Gods, get some first impressions until I join a draft. Your best source for official spoilers is of course the Born of the Gods card image gallery. You see here what was spoiled when recording this video. And I mean, one thing is to just go through all of these, and I might do this in a later episode where you can just see what each card does. Tap X target creature, scry 1. Very simple card here. And of course, bestow creatures are back. I just talked about that. Some of the themes are shaping up on the rarer cards. You see a creature supporting auras, but that's not really what I want to be talking about. What I want to be talking about is just really two of the first new mechanics that I saw in Born of the Gods, and Mark Rosewater was nice enough to write a little article about that. And the first thing is Tribute. Now, for those that don't know, Tribute works in the way that your opponent has the option to give your creature a +1/+1 counters when it enters the battlefield, and the amount of +1/+1 counters is given by the number behind Tribute. Now, if your opponent declines to make your creature stronger, then it's going to give you a positive effect either way. So in this case, when Farragut's Giant enters the battlefield, if Tribute wasn't paid, Farragut's Giant deals 5 damage to each opponent. So what you get is a 5-mana 3/3 that deals 5 to your opponent, or a 5-mana 5/5, both of which sounds pretty good. Now, we call this a Punisher mechanic, and there's a lot of red cards of the past, or there are some red cards of the past that work similarly to that. Could show you Brobeat. It's probably the most popular example of that. Let's see. Alright, here we have it in its original printing as well. Any player may have Brobeat deal 5 damage to him or her. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. So what Brobeat did, or still does, is either you deal 5 damage or you draw 3 cards. And something that I heard Patrick Sullivan say recently about Brobeat was that it would either deal 5 damage for a red burn deck, or it would draw 3 cards that would deal 5 damage effectively, because there was so much burn in the deck. So his point was that Punisher mechanics in general are pretty bad because you give your opponent the option of what is the least good for you or what is best for him. So if the two effects on a Punisher card are very different from each other, there's a high chance that your opponent has one of them which is a lot less bad for them than the other. So in the case of Brobeat, the two options were very similar, meaning that the opponent was stuck between a rock and a hard place and didn't really have a good option to choose from, making this a comparably good Punisher card. So summing up, Punisher cards are in general bad because of the option that you give your opponent. On the other hand, the more similar the two options are, the more likely it is that it's going to be a good card because your opponent can't make such a big impact with the decision he has. So now we can look at Farrage's Giant again, and the thing is, in both cases, Farrage's Giant is best when you are being aggressive, or if you have been aggressive throughout the game. If your opponent is on a low life total, he can't afford to take 5 damage. If he's under pressure, he can't afford to take 5 damage. So he's forced to give you a 5/5. If your opponent is on a high life total, if you haven't been pressuring him at all, he's just going to take 5 damage happily, just so that you don't get a 5/5 but a 3/3 instead. So if you get a 3/3 and your opponent is happy to take 5 damage, then you haven't really maximized Farrage's Giant's effectiveness or utility. In a perfect world, you want your opponent to be just sitting there and knowing that taking 5 damage is going to lose him the game, but giving you a 5 mana 5/5 is also putting him under a lot of pressure or in a lot of trouble. So Tribute, really interesting mechanic, going to be some really interesting gameplay, and it's going to be crucial to maximize how your Tribute cards affect your opponent's decision making. On the other hand, if you know you're playing against a deck with a lot of Tribute cards, you have to be making very sure that you can afford to choose the lesser evil more often than not. You don't want to be put into positions where your opponent can just continue on playing Tribute creatures and you are forced to always take the worst options because you might be on a low life total, for example. So Tribute, a Punisher mechanic, but definitely developed nicely, designed nicely, so that both of these feel pretty powerful if they work out. And even if you only get the lesser option, both of these are still very competitively priced for 5 mana, especially of course if you happen to get the 5 mana 5/5, which should be your goal at all time. Alright, on to the next mechanic, which is Inspired. We have an example here. Whenever Oriskos Sun Guide becomes untapped, you gain 2 life. Inspired basically is a triggered ability that triggers upon a creature untapping. So you untap it during your untap step, Inspired triggers during upkeep. And I've read a lot of things about equipping your creatures so you can tap them, or using some kind of other combination of cards to get your creatures tapped and limited. It's important to keep in mind that the easiest way to get any creature tapped, as long as it doesn't have vigilance, is to be attacking. And that might ring a bell. We are talking about Theros. We've talked about Tribute and the need to pressure your opponent or not be pressured by your opponent. Now we are talking about Inspired, and we're talking about getting your creatures tapped. That means you want to be attacking. You want to make your creatures be able to attack. You want to be holding the combat tricks that make it difficult for your opponent to find the right blocks. And in that sense, Inspired and Tribute are mechanics that fit into the overall theme of Theros very easily, and that would be with Heroic and Bestow. I will make my attackers, I will make my creatures huge, I will make them difficult to block. If you block them, I'll save them with tricks, and they will trigger with beneficial abilities in the form of heroic creatures. Ringsteed Rider, great example, but even the lesser heroic cards, and combined with a huge amount of tricks. So in this case, you don't have to target the creatures, but sometimes you will have to target them anyway, just to make them survive and get the untap trigger, for example. Now in this case, Oriskos Sun Guide is really similar to a 2/2 lifelink creature, as long as it lives and gets to untap. So it's kind of like a delayed lifelink trigger, if you want. Nothing to be too excited about, but if you get to untap with this a couple of times, it's definitely worth the 2 mana investment. And if you put an Ordeal of Nylea or Ordeal of Heliod on there, it might just not only be impossible for your opponent to kill it by blocking, you also get a huge amount of life, and I can easily think of more powerful untap triggers than this one. All right, there's one more mechanic that Mark highlights in his article, so I'm going to talk about that as well really quickly before wrapping things up. And that's the mechanic of enchantment creatures. Now, what I don't know is if this is going to be limited to rare cards or only a very few cards in the set, maybe one for each color. So there definitely aren't going to be only enchantment creatures. So what is an enchantment creature? Well, we've already seen this on the bestow creatures because they also act as auras, so they are enchantment creatures, but there's nothing against putting the type line enchantment creature on other creatures as well, and this is a constructed card that you see right here. Now, if this is a trend in this limited format as it goes forward, then the main deckability of enchantment removal goes up even further, and especially that of instant enchantment removal. There's probably more of that in Born of the Gods, but we already know that there's quite a lot of them in Theros. For example, Artisan Sorrow, destroy target artifact or enchantment, scry 2. It's an instant for 4. It could be a very good main deck card if, in addition to bestow creatures, there's some other enchantment creatures running around. And I'm not even talking about the gods' weapons and things like that. All right. We've talked about Tribute, definitely very important for Limited going forward. We've talked about Inspired, also very important in Limited going forward. And don't overestimate how important Springleaf Drum is for Inspired decks. Just think about the fact that you need to be attacking with all of the mechanics we've talked about. And then Enchantment Creatures, I don't know how relevant, but might change card evaluations a little bit further down the line, especially if creatures that have the enchantment type line are a little more powerful because they are easier to remove. Then you definitely want to be the person being able to remove them. All right, that was my first look at some of the Born of the God mechanics. Now it's time to draft some Theros. I'm Simon Godson, enjoy the show.